Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
Africa, the cradle of civilization, has been home to some of the most powerful and sophisticated empires in human history. From the Great Pyramids of Egypt to the grandeur of Mali, Songhai, and Aksum, Africa once stood as a beacon of knowledge, wealth, and cultural dynamism. These empires thrived on vast trade networks, military prowess, and advanced political structures that rivaled and, in some cases, surpassed their European and Asian counterparts. However, the historical narrative of these African empires has been greatly diminished, deliberately erased, or misrepresented over centuries. The systematic reduction of Africa's historical prominence was not accidental. It was an orchestrated process fueled by colonial narratives, economic exploitation, and ideological suppression. Through invasions, forced cultural shifts, external manipulations, and the destruction of indigenous knowledge systems, once flourishing African civilizations were brought to their knees. This article delves into the complex and often overlooked reasons behind the decline of Africa's greatest empires and how their legacies were buried in history. Before the intervention of foreign forces, Africa was a thriving continent with a sophisticated societal structure. Empires such as ancient Egypt, Nubia, Carthage, Mali, Songhai, Great Zimbabwe, and Benin stood as testaments to Africa's ingenuity. These civilizations engaged in trade, developed intricate political systems, and fostered a culture of scholarship and innovation. The Kingdom of Aksum, for example, was one of the most powerful trading nations of its time, maintaining commercial ties with Rome, India, and Persia. Mali, under the legendary ruler Mansa Musa, was not only one of the wealthiest empires in history, but also a hub for Islamic scholarship, attracting scholars from across the known world. The walls of Great Zimbabwe still stand as a symbol of architectural brilliance, showcasing the continent's ability to construct enduring cities without the influence of European or Asian civilizations. Despite these achievements, Africa's historical narrative was later distorted. The decline of these empires did not occur due to inherent weakness or lack of progress, but as a result of external pressures, deliberate misrepresentations, and violent upheavals orchestrated by outside forces. One of the earliest forms of African historical suppression was through warfare and military invasions. The Egyptian civilization, one of the longest-standing empires in history, fell victim to a series of invasions, including the Persians, Greeks, and later the Romans. The absorption of Egypt into foreign control led to the gradual erasure of its African identity. Greek and Roman rulers appropriated Egyptian knowledge, often crediting Greek philosophers with advancements that originated from the African continent. The destruction of Carthage by the Romans was another catastrophic event. Carthage, a Phoenician-founded city-state located in modern-day Tunisia, rivaled Rome in power and influence. However, after the Punic Wars, the Romans utterly destroyed Carthage, erasing its contributions to African history and integrating its remnants into the Roman Empire. This obliteration ensured that much of Carthage's achievements in engineering, trade, and governance were overshadowed by Roman dominance. Islamic conquests also played a significant role in reshaping African history. While Islam brought literacy and new trade opportunities, it also led to the decline of many indigenous African kingdoms. The fall of Christian Nubia, for example, was a direct result of the Islamic expansion, leading to the erasure of its distinct historical identity. One of the most devastating blows to African empires was the slave trade. The trans-Saharan slave trade, which predated the transatlantic trade, saw African individuals being sold to Arab nations for centuries. This trade not only drained Africa of its human resources, but also disrupted its societal structures. However, it was the transatlantic slave trade that left the most indelible mark on Africa's historical landscape. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, European powers systematically raided, manipulated, and destroyed African kingdoms to sustain the demand for labor in the New World. Powerful empires such as the Kingdom of Congo, Dahomey, and Oyo were weakened by European interference, internal conflicts, and the depopulation caused by the mass exportation of Africans to the Americas. The intellectual and cultural disruption caused by the slave trade cannot be overstated. The theft of millions of African lives meant that vast numbers of scholars, warriors, and artisans who could have strengthened African societies were instead exploited in foreign lands. This depopulation directly led to economic stagnation and political instability, setting the stage for colonial exploitation. The European colonization of Africa in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was another defining moment in the systematic erasure of African historical achievements. Colonial powers imposed artificial borders, dismantled traditional governance systems, and imposed European languages, religions, and education systems. This was not just a means of control, but an effort to rewrite history in favor of European superiority. Colonial education systems deliberately omitted African historical greatness, portraying African societies as primitive and without significant contributions to world civilization. Scholars and historians were encouraged to focus on European history, while African achievements were dismissed as myths or attributed to foreign influences. African artifacts, knowledge, and even entire manuscripts, such as those from the renowned University of Timbuktu, were either destroyed or appropriated by European institutions. Even after African nations gained independence, the effects of historical distortion persisted. Western academic institutions continued to control the narrative, with African history being underrepresented or inaccurately depicted. Efforts to restore African history were often met with resistance, as global institutions sought to maintain the Eurocentric version of world history. Despite these efforts, the truth about Africa's historical prominence is slowly resurfacing. Archaeological discoveries, historical revisionism, and the work of African scholars are gradually reclaiming Africa's rightful place in history. The legacies of great African empires are being unearthed, proving that Africa was not a passive participant in history, but an active force in shaping the world. The diminishing of African empires in history was not a natural occurrence, but a deliberate act orchestrated through invasions, slavery, colonialism, and historical misrepresentation. These powerful civilizations, once beacons of knowledge, trade, and governance, were deliberately undermined to serve the interests of foreign powers. However, Africa's history cannot be erased forever. The resurgence of African historical studies and the global recognition of Africa's contributions to human civilization are vital steps toward rewriting the true narrative of Africa's past. It is through understanding and acknowledging these historical truths that Africa can reclaim its legacy and ensure that future generations know the greatness that once defined the continent.